Now let's take a look at Maya rendering. We're going to start off with the render settings window, which is where we control most of our rendering parameters. We can get to this in one of two places. We can go into Windows, Rendering Editors, Render Settings, or we can just press this button on the interface, which is what I usually do. However we get there, this will open the Render Settings menu. And this menu has a number of different options. Now, the first and probably the most important is which renderer are we using? Now, we've looked at this a little bit before, but we can select any number of renderers. By default, Maya uses the Maya software renderer. And when you select that, it has its own tab for the attributes that you can set for that renderer. If we change renderers, let's say we go to the Hardware 2.0 renderer, again, it will have a different set of tabs. Now, we're going to be using Menarray for most of this, so let's go into Menarray, and you'll see that Menarray has actually a number of different tabs. Now, all of them have one tab in common, and that's the Common tab. Now, this controls a number of things, such as image size, type of image, aspect ratio, all the things that are common to rendering. So if we scroll down, probably the first one we'll see is color management. And so we can select any sort of color management scheme we want. I'm just going to leave this at default, but Maya does allow you to do color management on your images, which is really nice. Next is file output. So this is kind of important. What's the name of the file that we're outputting? Now this works mostly for batch rendering. If we just press the render image button in the interface, it will give us a render with no file name. But if we're doing a batch render, we have to give it a name. So if we don't set anything, it uses the scene name. Then after that, we can select whatever image format we want. And then in that image, we can select what sort of compression. Now this next one is very important. This determines whether you're rendering individual images or animation. So this changes the type of image. So if we go the first two here, the name or the name.extension, those are single frame. Anything past this has a pound sign in it, and this will give us multiple images. So if you're rendering animation, these are the ones that you want. So for example, if I click this last one here, you can see here that the file name has changed. Right now I'm in scene 1201, and then it's going to append a 001.jpg through 10.jpg. So this is determined by the frame padding. So if we want, we can bring this up or down to insert any number of leading zeros. So if I know I'm going to render 1,000 frames, then I want to make sure that I have 4 digits in my frame number. Now, the actual number of frames that we're rendering is determined here by the frame range. We can give it a start frame, an end frame, and then we can also skip frames. So if we want to render every second frame or every third frame, we can do that. Now I'm going to scroll down a little bit here. We can also skip existing frames. So if you had a render bail out and the image is already on the hard disk, it'll just go ahead and skip that. And then if we want, we can also renumber frames. So if you wanted to render every other frame, but then number them sequentially, you could do that as well. Now, another important thing is which camera are we rendering? If we look into our scenes here, we may have just a perspective camera, but we may have multiple cameras. So if we have 3 or 4 cameras in the scene, we need to select which one gets rendered. And then down here is image size. How big of an image do we want? Do we want it to be HD, square, what sort of aspect ratio? So we have a number of presets here. So you could do 640 by 480. You could do full 1080, HD 1080. And notice how the width and height changes. So if I go from HD 720, that's 1280 by 720, to HD 1080, it'll change. And then finally, resolution. And now this is just for print. So if you're rendering for print, it will stamp that into the file. And then also your aspect ratio. So if you're doing a compressed pixel, then you need to enter that here. So if you're doing something like the old D1, which had a 0.9 aspect ratio, you can put that in here. And then we have a number of other ones here, such as scene assembly and render options. One of the more important things here is that we actually have a default light in the scene. So if you don't put any lights in your scene, Maya will automatically put one in there, and you can turn that off here if you want. So we have a number of common parameters for rendering that include the type of file, the file name, how much animation we're going to render, as well as the size and aspect ratio of our files. So once you understand this, we can start to render our images.